Hey guys, in this video we're going to take a quick look at the Great Depression. Naturally, when you think of depression, you may think about what people feel when they feel depressed, right? If somebody's dealing with depression, right? We talk about somebody who feels sad all the time. Maybe they feel so depressed, sometimes they don't want to get out of bed. They don't get things done, right? They don't want to move. And then with really severe cases of depression, people can even be so low and so miserable that sometimes they contemplate or commit suicide. Okay. Well, the Great Depression was an economic depression that affected the country. So, very similarly, this is a very bad thing to happen to the country. And again, when you think economic, you should always think economic, money, business. Okay. So, everything that can go wrong with the country's economy, anything that can go wrong with businesses does. So, you have things like high unemployment. If you're getting paid, your income from your job is going to be smaller than usual. It's not going to, you're not going to be able to buy as much stuff. Businesses are going to fail. They're going to go bankrupt. And remember all those goods that are produced and sold? Well, fewer and fewer and fewer people are buying. So less and less products are being made. So again, factories need to shut down, what have you. And yes, the economy gets so bad, people are driven to suicide. Like people will dives, like this is really going to hurt people physically and what have you. Let's take a look. When we're looking at the Great Depression, one of the biggest things that historians want to do with this period is understand why it happened, right? Because if you understand why the Great Depression happened in the 1930s, hopefully you can learn things that can prevent a Great Depression from happening again in the future, okay? So, remember the roaring 20s, right? People had lots and lots of money and things were going great. So a lot of times you ask, how did we go from this period where people were so incredibly wealthy? Remember we looked at this picture, we said, oh my God, she's got so many diamonds. She ran out of hands. She had to stick them on her headband, How did we go from this era, the 1920s, the roaring 20s, where people had so much wealth, to a period in the 1930s when the country is broke? Well, it was due to a couple of factors. These are the ones that are identified. The first one is that wealth inequality. The fact that only a very small number of Americans had the majority of the wealth. This is a very unhealthy economy. When you have this kind of situation, this is an unhealthy economy. Because for an economy to function, you want lots of people to be spending money, lots of people to support businesses. You get what I'm saying? And what happens is rich people have money. Rich people generally do not tend to spend money in the community. When a rich person is rich, when they gain more money, they're going to take that wealth and they may put it in a savings account. It may just sit there. Or they may buy, they may spend it in another country. They may, travel somewhere. But it's not like it's not like a poor person. A poor person gets a little extra money. They spend it in a restaurant. They spend it on clothes. They spend it on food. They spend it in the community and they support lots of smaller businesses. So this wealth inequality is one of the things that has been looked at as a cause of the Great Depression. Second was this use of credit. The fact that people were buying too many things on credit. They were buying them in installments. And again, we were saying that in the 1920s, people felt rich, right? They're buying refrigerators and vacuum cleaners and radios. But even though they didn't have enough money to buy it, it was okay. I'll just borrow, right? And what happens is banks are making a lot of money, lending out money. And they want to keep that flow of cash coming. So banks start making riskier and riskier loans. And so companies love this, right? Everybody's buying up all these products. So they start making more products and more products and more products and then flooding the market. And then all these products are getting good. The problem is once the economy starts to tank, it's going to have a huge impact because now people are going to stop. They're not going to be able to pay back all these loans. They're not going to buy goods at the same rate that they used to. So this has also been one of the pieces that made why the Great Depression was so terrible. So far, causes of the Great Depression: wealth inequality and too much buying on credit, too much installment buying. The third piece that people have looked at as a cause of the Great Depression is the use of tariffs. Now, you may remember, I always tell you guys, when you think of tariff, think of a tax on foreign goods. Technically, it is not a tariff, okay? Technically, it's not a tariff. But it kind of functions, it basically functions to make foreign goods more expensive, okay? Tariffs make foreign goods more expensive. And in a sense, it really, you can see the political cartoon, it works like a wall. Tariffs work like a wall. So what do I mean by that? You know, because of the tariff, because these foreign goods cost more money, foreign companies who want to sell to America, they're blocked, right? They would love to sell their goods to America, but they can't. The tariff makes their goods too expensive, so it stops them, which is fine because American companies are on the other side of that wall, and the American companies can sell to Americans, right? And that tariff keeps it so that it's most of that business is just going to stay among American companies, and that's great. The problem is if Americans stop buying goods, because we're dealing with the Depression, right? And now these American companies say, oh, Americans aren't buying. We're they stop buying my goods. What am I going to do? Let me see if I can sell these goods to some other country. Well, those U.S. companies hit that same wall. The same way it keeps foreigners out, it also keeps American companies in. Why? Because when the U.S. creates tariffs, so does everybody else. We block them, they block us. So this was one of the issues, that when Americans stopped buying products, American companies didn't have the option to sell them abroad to other countries. In addition, this is also, the Great Depression happens after World War I. What happens is during World War I, there's lots of fighting. And because of all that fighting, European companies are not doing business. European factories are destroyed from bombings. European employees, they're too busy, they're on the war, they're serving as soldiers. They can't go to work, they can't make goods. They're too busy being soldiers. The farmlands are destroyed. I mean, if you think of, those great big fields where people were fighting, where the trenches were being built, that was all farmland, that's being destroyed as soldiers march across it. So what happens is, because Europe could not produce goods and services during the war, and then, of course, immediately after the war, because, again, there was so much destruction, they were forced to buy goods from America. Well, by 1930, Europe has had a chance to rebuild. So Europe doesn't need our products anymore. And because of that, European demand drops. All right, so what were the causes of the Great Depression? Income inequality, too much credit, too much installment buying, the fact that we had tariffs, that we didn't have so much international trade, right? The lack of foreign demand because of the end of World War I and the tariffs. And then the last one is stock market speculation. You may remember we talked about how people were buying stocks like crazy, right? Because the stock market kept going up, 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 up. And a lot of people were buying so many stocks, they didn't even just buy stocks. They started buying stocks even on margin, where they borrowed money to be able to buy even more stocks. And what ends up happening is, you got to remember that prices are set by two factors, right? Prices are determined by supply and demand, okay? The more people want something, the more people demand it, the higher the price goes. If there's a high demand, that creates a high price. And it's also supply. If there's very little of something that everybody wants, the price is higher. If there's too much of something that nobody wants, that causes prices to drop. All right. So what happens with stock market speculation, so many people were buying stocks, right? They were buying stocks like crazy. They were all looking to get rich. That drives the prices up. Because think about it, everybody's trying to buy stocks. So because everybody's buying them up, there's very few stocks available. The supply of stocks is going to be much lower. People are busy buying. And not only that, but again, like I said, people are buying them, the demand is high. So a low supply, high demand, prices go up, 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 up. And when you buy a stock, you're not buying anything like, you're buying a share of a company. You know what I'm saying? You're buying something where it's like, what is that worth? It's worth whatever you tell me it's worth. I'm buying into a company that it has value, sure. But the value is really determined by, like I said, supply and demand. And if people think it's worth a lot of money, it is. But what ends up happening is during the Great Depression, once the market starts to crash, right? And now stocks start to fall. Suddenly, as the prices start to drop because fewer people want to buy stocks, they start being risky. The demand for stocks goes down. And as fewer people want to buy stocks because the prices start dropping, right? The supply of stocks available is very high. Everybody's trying to get rid of their stocks. All these companies, I thought this company was worth so much money. This company's worth nothing. It's about to go out of business. When these companies go out of business, your stock is worthless. Yesterday, it may have been worth thousands upon thousands of dollars. If that company goes out of business, your little piece of paper, your stock, which is like ownership of the business, if that company goes out of business, your stock is worth nothing. It doesn't matter what it was worth yesterday. Today, it's worth nothing if that company goes out of business. So what happens is as the stock market starts to crash, the prices come all the way down really, really far. And again, that was stock market speculation. Stock market speculation drove the prices of stocks too high, like really artificially high because there was such crazy demand. So when it finally corrects itself, it sends it crashing down. All right. So again, the causes of the Great Depression: income inequality, too much buying on credit, too much installment buying, the lack of international demand based on the tariffs, as well as the end of World War I. And the last piece was stock market speculation, the fact that people were buying very risky stocks. They were spending too much money, investing too much money in the stock market. So now the Great Depression begins. And the Great Depression officially begins on October 29th, 1929. And the day is known as Black Tuesday. They still talk about this day today. It's very famous. And the reason why it's so famous is that literally in one single day, the stock market lost $10 to $15 billion in value in just one day. And then you see by November, so that literally just weeks later, $30 billion is lost. People's fortunes were literally wiped out overnight. The people went from having stock portfolios worth millions to stock portfolios worth nothing. And there were people who bought stocks on margin, and they would make a margin call. Not only did they lose all the money they invested, they still owed more money to pay back the loans they had taken. So you literally, remember I talked about depression, literally there were suicides. This was not unheard of. This guy literally was so upset and he was so distraught at the idea that his entire fortune was wiped out. He jumps out a window. And there are many stories about that, about people maybe not jumping out a window, but sitting in their office, taking a gun, putting it to their head and just blowing their brains out because they could not face the fact that they had lost it all, that their fortunes were wiped out. As you can see from the graphs, the stock market crash was very, very severe. It was crazy. What happens is literally you can see how high the market is. So what happens is usually, the market would be high and, might have a little dip, but then it would come right back and, and then come climbing back and, But when you had Black Tuesday, forget it, that market started coming down. And you can see on the right, every hour, the market is going down lower and lower and lower. So think about it. You have a stock portfolio. Let's say you have a stock that's worth, $5,000, and then an hour later, your stock is worth $4,000. You say, all right, now I'm going to hold on to it. It'll come back. Then an hour later, your stock now is worth $1,000. Oh, that's a big drop. And a lot of people at that point would be like, you know what? I'd rather take 1,000 than zero. And they start selling the stock. And just in a panic, they're selling those stocks. They're like, hey, I got to get my money back. This is too risky for me. I just want to get my money. I just want to get something. I'd rather get something than nothing. And the problem is by flooding the market with their stocks, by trying to sell their stocks, they're increasing the supply of stocks for sale. And because most people are trying to sell, because some people might be like, oh, maybe it's cheap. Maybe I'll buy a little. But that demand is very low. There's very few of them. Most people are trying to just get rid of their stocks. And what happens is the more, and then the stocks would drop in value. So now it's not worth $1,000. Now it's worth $50. And at that point, forget about it. Nobody wants to buy it. There's no demand. Supply is huge. Everybody's trying to get rid of their stocks at the same time. And then the stock is worth zero. It's worth nothing. And you're wiped out and you have nothing. That was the thing, is this panic takes over the market and it just crashes. And you could see that the stock market gets bad on Black Tuesday, starts to climb back, but then crashes again. And then crashes again. And you can see it gets to its lowest point in 1932. And the stock market has collapsed. It's lost all this value. And it wiped out people's fortunes. Now, this is a really bad situation. What makes it, to extent worse is the attitude of the president. You had Herbert Hoover, who was in charge, and he's a big believer in laissez-faire economics. So his feeling is again, you should know what laissez-faire means. It means that the government should be hands off of business, right? And so his attitude is, guys, come on, prosperity is just around the corner. Don't panic, it'll be fine. It'll work its way out. And that's his attitude, that he's not getting involved. It's not his, that the economy should be left alone and it'll just correct itself and no worries. And you can see the political cartoon. Trust me, prosperity is just around the corner. And then he turns the corner. Some guy's jumping out his office window. Okay, well, maybe not that corner. But that's the thing, is it kind of, today I kind of look back and it feels kind of callous to a lot of Americans. This is who were really suffering and really scared. This kind of attitude of like, it'll just fix itself, was a little uncomfortable. And again, but he really believed this. He believed in rugged individualism. He was convinced that if the government starts giving Americans money and starts giving them direct relief, that people would become dependent on them and they'll start becoming lazy and it'll destroy the country. And so instead of, giving money to people, if anything, he should just give money to businesses. I mean, that was the idea, that you should have rugged individualism, that you should pull yourself up by the bootstraps. You may remember, for those of you who've had Global 10, if you studied the Irish potato famine, that may sound familiar to you. There was a lot of people in England also who believed in laissez-faire economics, who felt that the British government should not give any kind of assistance or aid to the Irish because, it would make them lazy and so on and so forth. But like I said, President Hoover, his response to the Great Depression is he's not going to give any assistance to individuals. That the only thing he will do is that he will give some money and credit to businesses. That his feeling is if you support businesses, you help businesses get back on their feet, that will help American people get back on their feet. That, this will trickle down, that, they'll be able to provide jobs and opportunities. And that's how you fix it. And this debate over, direct aid versus trickle down aid is something that's still debated today. And there are economists who promote both sides, But at this point, in history, people were, like I said, the American people were not happy with, this attitude of, it'll just work itself out. It was not a popular stand then. It's a little bit more popular today, but back then it was not popular. Because again, in the Great Depression, things were really bad. Really bad. You had things known as Hoovervilles. This is an example. What happens is you had so many people who were homeless that they end up basically building shacks on any piece of kind of public available land, so park or whatever, whatever property, abandoned property, and they would just set up shacks, and people were living here, and they literally called them Hoovervilles. They named them after the president. And here you have bread lines at soup kitchens. I mean, take a look at the length of this line. These people are waiting. They got to be on this line for hours and hours, to get a bowl of soup and a little hunk of bread. And they're willing to wait on this line for, again, a bowl of soup and a hunk of bread. Can you imagine how desperate you got to be to wait on this line? And, take a look at the left side of the picture near the front of the line. Look for like a flash of white by the people's faces. You see the flash of white? Some of the people on the left. You can see these people are not dressed, like a stereotypically homeless person. So a lot of these guys are dressed in a suit and a tie. They got a suit, tie on. They're wearing their hats. They have newspaper under them. These are not, your stereotypical down on their luck, skid row, kind of bum, kind of, that stereotype. These are people who were middle class or upper middle class or what have you, who used to make great money. They're all dressed. They have great wardrobes because they used to be going out to business and they used to have these great lives. And the Great Depression wiped them out to the point where they are waiting online to get a bowl of soup and a hunk of bread. One of the things, obviously, one of the side effects of the Great Depression is it will reduce immigration. All right. If you take a look at the red circle, nobody wants to move to America during the Great Depression. Shocking, I know, but that's one way to reduce the desire to come to the U.S. And that's one of the effects. The other big change in the Great Depression is that it changes people's voting practices. You may know, like today, people are like, I'm a Democrat, I'm a Republican, and they're kind of dyed in the wool. But this Great Depression, people were so unhappy with Hoover. I mean, they really were not. Hoover was very, very unpopular. He was so unpopular that people actually switched their voting affiliation. People went from the Republican Party, as you can see on the top. Herbert Hoover was elected by the vast majority of the country. Vast majority of the country voted Republican. And in the following election, almost the entire country went Democrat. Like they switched party affiliations. They completely flipped around because they were so upset about this situation. They blamed the Republicans. Just something FYI, during the Great Depression, one of the things that came out of it was the Hoover Dam. It starts kind of 2 years into the Great Depression. The Hoover Dam is important because if you see where it is on the map, it's right outside of Las Vegas. It's in the southwest of the country. And if you know anything about that area near Arizona and Vegas and Southern California, that section of the country is like desert. I mean, it's dry as bone dry. And the Hoover Dam is critically important because it is going to supply water and electrical power to that area of the country. And today it's very popular. A lot of people live there. So the Hoover Dam is critically important to the development of that area of the country. All right. So the last thing I need to talk about is the Bonus Army protests. Now, this happens in 1932, right? So Herbert Hoover is president. And what ends up happening is there are 12 to 15,000 World War I veterans. And what happens is they had fought in the war and they are entitled to get a bonus. But what happens is they say, look, I can't wait for my bonus check. I need to get my bonus now. It's the Great Depression. I'm broke. I need the money. I want an early payment on my bonus. And so these, like I said, 12 to 15,000 families. So it's the men plus their families and their kids. They all come to Washington. Now, these people are basically, the vast majority of them are broke. They're not going to get hotel rooms. So they sent up, so what you can see on the bottom left, they set up tents and things like that, just temporary to be able to live there while they're protesting. So they live there, they stay there, they're protesting for days on end, trying to get a bill passed that would give them the money early. Anyway, the bill is defeated. It doesn't happen. They're not going to get their money. So the majority of the people who came to D.C. leave. But there's still a good sized chunk, about 2,000 to 5,000 bonus marchers who stay in Washington, D.C. And again, these are World War I veterans and their families. Okay? Veterans, right? Respect. People who put their lives on the line to defend their country. In the World War I, right? We were making the world safe for democracy. These are our honored veterans, right? So what happens? Herbert Hoover decides he's got to get these bonus marchers out of Washington, D.C. They're, a security threat or whatever. And what does he do? He sends the army to clear them out. He sends the army with tear gas. They set fire to the tanks. They set fire to their tents. And they have tanks marching in to clear out these bonus marchers. I mean, it's crazy. And these photographs get out to the media and forget about it. The American people are like disgusted because, again, an army veteran was killed, police and other veterans were wounded, and people like, you can't treat these people like this way. So forget about it. His popularity, this is like the final nail in the coffin, so Hoover is very unbelievably unpopular after this. And it just destroys any chance of any kind of election. So ends up Hoover doesn't even get to be the nominee. He's not even. There's somebody else who ends up representing the Republican Party, and the Republicans lose the 1932 election to Franklin Delano Roosevelt. So FDR is going to become president. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, because now he's stuck with all these problems and it's going to be his responsibility to fix it. By the way, remember FDR, you cannot just call him President Roosevelt. Remember, FDR, there is two President Roosevelts, right? There's Teddy Roosevelt and FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. They are actually cousins, by the way, but they're very different ages, very different years. But like I said, there's two different Roosevelts. There's Teddy and there's FDR. Okay? All right. And with that, we are done. Thanks so much.